Welcome, folks. Episode 33 live today, January, June 7th, 2023. I'm your host, Chad Jenkins of the Christ Over Fear show. Hey, right now, just some stuff so everybody knows. We live stream this now on two separate kind of social media platforms. So it's live on the YouTube channel, and that handle is just at Christ Over Fear. And then also, we are live on the LinkedIn page of Christ Over Fear, and that LinkedIn company page is Christ Over Fear as well. So those are your two ways to get this show live, so you can see the video and audio. And then later today, June 7th, 2023, I will hang this onto the podcast platforms, and it'll be up on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, all of your podcast platforms. And I think that's probably the number one way people are getting this, or through the podcast. So just know that later today, this show will be up and operational on it. I love it. Anytime I get to have a guest that I'm familiar with and that I know from a young age. When I say young, 17 through probably 21, 22, it's just a special occasion. And that's what's been, I guess, so I'm grateful for, I guess, what when I think of like being, gratitude, having a heart of gratitude, it's for this show that what I enjoy the most out of it is, one, hearing the stories of individuals, whether I know them or not, but hearing what Christ has done in their life, what Christ continues to do. But then it's even extra special when I know that individual. And Joe Peppers today, our guest, I do know well. Him and I were prepsters, the United States Military Academy Preparatory School, when it was hard back in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. So we were prepsters together in the summer of 1997. And then we were also classmates at West Point. Joe was a basketball player, as well as he ran track. And then he also switched to rugby during his time frame at United States Military Academy. He's a 2002 graduate of West Point. He commissioned as a field artillery officer. Did 3 combat deployments to Iraq as a field artillery officer. And I think he also had some other titles in that. He got out as a company commander, I believe in 2010 timeframe, from the Army, went on and has basically been in the corporate sector since then. He's worked for Amazon. He's worked for Apple. He's worked for the White's company. He went back to Amazon, and now actually he is at Amazon again as a senior business coach for them. So hopefully we'll get to talk about that, as well as he has settled his roots in the Jacksonville, Florida area. I would be remiss, and he would probably punch me if I didn't share that he is originally from Chi-Town, Chicago, because he's a big time Chicago fan in every sport there is. And he probably punched me through the screen. So I got to tell him, yeah, he may have laid down his roots in Jacksonville, but he's a Chicago guy through and through. And then he also had Kids Hope Alliance, which is a nonprofit that he ran for a couple of years down in Jacksonville, helping the youth in that community. And that's just the type of person Joe is. So without further ado, I get to bring him up on the screen, and here everybody gets to meet the one and only Mr. Joe Peppers. What is up, man?
What's going on? Good to see you, man.
It's great to see you. We got to chat like for all of maybe 30 seconds before you came on. Right. I didn't get to share. I'm very jelly right now of your beard because it has not enough gray in it. I'm just wondering, what shade of Just for Men do you put in that?
Oh, it's finally getting in. Like, I feel like all of our classmates are rocking the beard. Like,
well, dude, I know, but I had it like 35 through 37. Mine was sweet because it was still dark. And now it's gone where it's like so much salt and not enough pepper in there that it's like nasty. Like all salt, a silver beard is sweet, but mine's kind of scraggly. So I had to go. So yours is still looking nice and dark, which is sweet.
Right. Yeah, it seems like it's gonna start to change here in a little bit, but it's nice because I've been rocking the bald head for 15 years, so now I at least get some hair somewhere on my head.
Yeah, there you go, man. Well, I love it. You look great, and I'm excited to hear you and your story. And I'm thankful. I mean that, from gratitude, just that we get to catch up, because I think oftentimes maybe people think on the guests on this show or those that I know. I mean, you and I have now finally reconnected through this venture, through this show, and it's been years in the making. And it's an honor for me to get to hear your story and to have you share it. And I'm just excited to connect with you today, man.
Yeah, man, I'm super excited as well. I'm really proud of you for everything you've been doing, and it's really, it's almost serendipitous. God just sort of like he works in these mysterious ways, but it's really cool to know that the character development that we had together, and many of the lessons that we've learned, some the hard way, are really you're voicing to so many men. I think that this is like a really important time for men, and I think like this is really a time for bravery and courage, and I'm really excited and proud of you for everything you've been doing, man.
Well, I appreciate that, and I love it. I guess that's going to segue us into even the first question because, one, I want to know your story about how you decided to go to the prep school and what that venture was from Chicago to go to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and to play sports, and then to continue at West Point. So, I guess that'll be my first question. But as we are talking about that, because you brought it up and I love it, I think we're going to go deep today, which I love, is the character development at West Point, but also some of the underbelly of that maybe is, I know for me at least, there's some areas where, you know, almost this feeling of having to be perfect all of the time and never being able to be fallible as a human, can cause maybe some areas of character flaws that are hidden. And I'm happy to speak on, but I want to know where you go with that on the character and kind of the hard times of that as well. So can you just kind of share how you did get to Chicago to West Point?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I had gotten into a couple schools, couple state schools in Illinois, and I also got into Hampton, and Hampton was really my first choice. I got into ROTC, like that was, I was super excited about that opportunity. And my mother, who was a guidance counselor, met a recruiter, a former Army football player, who came to her school, her high school, and she said, "Hey, I know you've been looking at ROTC. We should talk to this guy." And so he took me out. He was leaving on Friday, and he decided to delay his flight and have breakfast for me with me Saturday morning. And he sort of walked me through it. And from then on, I was really sold on this opportunity. It was obviously the best school I got into, and so that was one of the biggest drivers. But my parents were elated to even for me to even look at it. And it really changed my life. It changed the course of my life. I don't know that I would be the man that I am today without it. And I don't know, quite honestly, that I would have really been able to take a hard look at myself and do an AAR, if you will, and say like, hey, you know, Joe, like you're suffering and you need to get better pretty quickly. Because you're causing suffering. And so I think that's, if there's one benefit of West Point, it's really this, to your point, there is this challenge of ambition, right? And so like this idea that like I remember writing the papers and like, and getting to prep school, like that was a really emotionally taxing event for me. But I remember when we got in, my dad started crying, and I was like, "Wow, okay, like I got into like 5 schools, like it's not a big deal." But like you realize, on graduation day, we've got President Bush, and he's giving the speech. I mean, like that was really, that the gravity of that moment was huge, and so I was super grateful for Captain Dawkins, sort of like running into me, and it really it's really been. It was really a dream come true, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and can you talk about that? The AAR, I love, and that's for anybody else out there, because this is, obviously combat veteran and law enforcement and those who have served, but also, I think to your point up front, for men in whatever walk they're in, and if they've never served, I think they can benefit from this as well. And after action review is what AAR stands for. And you talked about not having the experience of West Point may have prevented you from then not doing an AAR on your life later on. When did you kind of take note or take inventory on conducting that after action review?
Yeah, I was 40 years old. It
Yeah.
was January of, I was actually 39, turning 40, and it was January of 2019. And I think when I started in 2009, when I started on the path of wanting um, to go into corporate America and leave the military, I wrote a thing, and I think it's still on my LinkedIn. It's like, my job is to be a light in people's lives, and if I've done that, I've done my job.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty readily apparent that I was not a light, and I was really struggling with darkness, and secrets and pain. And when you have children, there's this you're especially if you're an involved parent, like you're constantly cultivating a child. You're right. You're curating like these little
Mm-hmm.
humans' life and trying to teach them discipline and these things. And so, like, as I'm developing these young people, these young little humans, I'm realizing that I've really missed the boat in terms of like really sharing my true pain, and ultimately, like one of my therapists said, it has to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so that contributed to like sort of almost like a prodigal son kind of thing, where like you take all your stuff and you leave, and then you realize like you're in the desert, man. Like
Yeah.
you're in a pigsty. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like you're not home anymore.
Mm-hmm. And how was that like during that time frame, I guess? I mean, what was the catalyst that was like, okay, I need to stop this. Like I need to stop and do that. And the reason I asked Joe is because I think for so often, for so many who maybe have similar paths as us, your story is unique, my story is unique, but there's those similarities that lie that then can help others who are on their unique journey, their unique path, but there's similarities that help them. I think for when I hear that and that you were 39 going 40, like while it was probably one of the most challenging times of your life, one of the most painful times of your life, like what a blessing it was that it's at 40 or 39 or 40 and it's not at
Right.
59 to 60 or it's not
Right.
69 to 70, right? And I
Right.
think we can so often, like for me, I was always like, Charlie Mike, continue mission. Like I just go, go,
Right.
go. Like let no, like we don't look in the rear view mirror. And it was I wasn't taking the courageous step of taking a knee and conducting. I always
Mm,
say and doing conducting SILs, right? SILs in Ranger School,
right.
stop, see, look, listen, smell.
Mm,
That's in combat in a patrol area, but it was like to do that in our life, to stop, see, look, listen, smell, like what's going on with me, what's going on with the family, what's going on with my relationships, like that I needed to perform instead of just continuing mission. So how did you get to that point at 39 to 40 to do that kind of that AAR?
yeah. I mean, in April of 2020, 19, I attempted suicide. And so, um, really, that was like a pretty monumental moment. It was a seminal moment in my life, uh, and really a cry for help, right? So, I attempted, and then I had this like really big disclosure to my ex-wife, and at the time, like one of the things the military teaches you is like I can be, you can be very capable in combat. You can be exercise critical thinking, and like right, like be able to make significant deductions, right? Like all of these things that make you a really really good military leader. And one of those things is learning how to manage your fear,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like bravery isn't necessarily not feeling fear, right? It's doing what's hard in the absence of fear. Well, learning that lesson requires skill, right? Like skill building. And so when you are now sort of like in the throes of like living chaos, right? Like and you've got like this inner turmoil, you it's really hard to exercise critical thinking when it applies to my heart
Mm-hmm.
and my personal relationships, my intimate relationships. And honestly, going to rehab and attempted suicide was really one of the best moments of my life, and there were consequences. There were severe consequences for some of my behavior, but I was able to really start over and sort of like say like, hey, what are you doing? And I'm still asking myself that question today, like, what are you doing? Like are you making good decisions? Because I didn't always do that, but I know that I'm doing that more often than I was. And I was listening to this podcast yesterday. It's like, hey, like, are you waking up in God's presence this morning? Like, are you like do you start? It's like a prayer over phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the first thing you do? Do you pray or do you get on your phone?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so at some point, I really discovered that I was untethered and almost, really, really rudderless, and largely because I had no purpose. I had no idea of what God wanted me to do, and even if I did, I wouldn't know what to do with it. And really, truly, like I didn't realize how blessed I was. Like really, like one of the first things, and Paul talks about this. Like the spirit of thankfulness, like there was such a significant absence of gratitude, and an understanding. Like sometimes you hear people say, the scarcity mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really not about money. It's
Right.
really about like, do you recognize like how blessed you are for
Mm-hmm.
breath, for
Mm-hmm.
like the use of your limbs, for the ability to build a relationship with your children, for community, right? Like, do you really recognize those things? And because if you don't, you are, you're setting particularly as a man, you're setting your family up for failure, because
Mm-hmm.
you have not recognized the immense value of and responsibility that you have to be a spouse and a provider for your children.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's so many unbelievable, valuable things you just discussed, but I guess I got to circle back to the first one, and it is, man, Joe, I appreciate you stating where you were at and where you were at with the attempted suicide, because we have to talk about that. We have to have courageous men such as yourself to be able to show those who are where you were at that point in 2020 when they're there right now, so that they know there's hope on the other side, that there's restoration on the other
Mm,
side, that there's
mm,
reconciliation on the other side, and that it doesn't have to end in it doesn't have to end for them, that there is hope in Christ when we're willing to go there. And for
mm.
you to do that and be a living testimony to that, man, I mean, it brings tears to my eyes, and I'm not ashamed of that.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I say, you know, God gave me emotions and feelings back, and it's the greatest gift he could ever given me, because I didn't
Right.
cry my whole entire adult life until my
Mm,
two children were born. And even that felt like out of body experiences until I went through kind of my come to Jesus moment when I was 37 and I hit where I had no other choice but him. And that's when everything came back to me from an emotional standpoint, and connecting those. So I'm not embarrassed about it, because I love you and I love what he has done with you, and that he is using you to a way in which you're willing to come on here and disclose that and share that, and the authenticity that I knew you would is just truly humbling, man. So thank you for that.
yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I just posted this morning. I look forward to the day when men will tell another man that they can feel.
Mm.
That, hey, like, you can feel pain,
Yeah.
you can mourn your losses, you can you can be remorseful, you can be sad, and these big emotions aren't going to make you spontaneously combust.
Right.
Right,
Right.
right, there's a magic in confession
Mm-hmm.
and processing pain that is one of the beautiful things about the human experience,
Mm.
right? Like, God is, I mean, think about this book. This book is a story of messiness. It's like,
Yes.
there's no other historical book, um, really, that largely really points to something larger than yourself, and also like how absent of morals we can be. So
Mm-hmm.
this is a story of humanity, and one of the things that men have learned how to do really well, particularly men our age, is mask their emotions, put monetary success over any other success,
Mm-hmm.
and quite honestly, we've forgotten how to love,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, like, if I got to cut off suffering, and Brene Brown says this really well. Like, if I got to cut off, like, sorrow, like, I'm also cutting off my access to joy.
Mm.
Right. So, I
Yeah.
don't get to cut off, curate a couple emotions out, because
Right.
what really is happening is, like, hey, can I dole out um conscientiousness? Can I dole out? Can I right? Like, the fruits of the spirit are really powerful
Mm.
tools and practices and habits. But, like, if I'm sort of cutting out, like, the self-control, I don't
Mm-hmm.
really get access to the other stuff. I don't really get the
Yeah.
peace and the other things, right? So, like, I,
Mm-hmm.
I gotta I gotta really be mindful of the fact that, like, the need for emotions. I mean, think about it. Jesus was the most loving human
Mm.
to ever exist. Like, the capacity of emotion that he must have had, right, is hard, is impossible to describe. And he's a man,
Right.
right? Like, so like, this is our leader, the head of the body of Christ, who's saying, like, I need you to love,
Mm.
right? I need you to love more than anything else,
Yeah.
right? And so, in order to love, you've got to feel the bad. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to feel the bad, and it found me, though.
Mm. Well, and I know, golly, you're just on fire for everything. This is awesome. I guess there's so many areas I could take this, but the one area I want to take it is because I think sports, to a large degree, just the youth in general and how we raise girls versus boys. But sports can play it, and then I think a pivotal area that both you and I experienced on shutting off emotion is the training that started at West Point and then continues as you advance into whatever officer basic courses and everything else, of learning how to remove kind of the emotional aspect of things to focus on the mission at hand to accomplish that task and purpose, which I don't disagree with, because it's necessary in the worst of conditions, which is what you and I both experience, is combat. However, I think it amplifies the cutting off of those emotions, and it severs them to a degree potentially that it's very difficult to then integrate those back
Mm-hmm.
into a human,
Mm-hmm.
not such an officer or a soldier type mentality, but the human experience that you're talking about, the human
Yeah.
experience that is not to be robotic, is not to not cut off those emotions, whether it's the good ones that we perceive, the joy, happiness, peace, or the bad ones, the pain, the hurt, the sorrow, the mourning. And so I think it's really powerful how you describe that. Hey, if you think you're cutting off the bad, the sorrow and the sadness, well, you're going to be cutting off the joy and the bliss that you feel as well. And until you can feel both those sides of the pendulum, man, we're really not living to our potential of the way
Right.
God created us.
Yeah, I mean, like, the pendulum is a good example. Like, imagine a pendulum that only swung one way.
Mm-hmm.
right? Just kept coming back to center, and it wasn't able to get to, right? Like the experience, and Abraham Lincoln, you know, there's obviously a lot of books on him. One of the things that's really, I think, fascinating about Lincoln is he really struggled with melancholy.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like we didn't have medicine 150 years ago, 160 years ago, but like to feel as much grief as he felt for as much loss as he had, he lost so many important people in his life. It requires healing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like my emotions, my mental health, are just as much as just as sensitive as my ankle, right? So
Yeah.
like sports and the military training allows me to be strong, but it's really largely physical strength, right? So like this is a demonstration of my ability, my capacity to be to run hard, to shoot straight, to use my voice to lead. And so, this idea that I am, this American dream, I'm chasing
Mm-hmm.
this purpose I've laid out, this goal to make, millions of dollars, or to be highly successful. Like if we really think about it, how many men, to include Christian men, say, I want to love the mess out of my wife?
Mm-hmm.
I like that is a life goal. Like imagine, like, like when you see Instagram and all this stuff, like you don't
Yep.
really see a lot of stuff that's posted on like, I am going to be the best dad I can be.
Right. Right.
Right. Like they're telling you about money and all these different things. That's one of the things that's really fascinating about LinkedIn is like some of these people are making $300,000 and they're miserable. And they're
Yeah.
miserable because they're not living in God's purpose. They're not living in, that they've cut off some of their emotions so that they can, their conscience is seared. And so like, you don't really get, like, you might be a lot happier as a school teacher making $60,000 a year living in your purpose
Right.
than you are, you know, operating at, a high financial capacity, but not having time for your children, not having time for your wife, not having time for your community. So, emotions are a really, really an integral part of the human experience, but they're also a really integral part of the life of a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, 1 Corinthians 13 is poetry, right? I mean, like
Right.
this kind of love doesn't exist, that keeps no record of wrongs and does not
Mm-hmm.
boast, right? Like this is really magical, part of the scripture. Like our ability to do that at a high level, like there's no app for that, right?
Right.
Like I'm not going to a link, like Facebook and Instagram and all these different platforms. They're not going to really maximize or really amplify, unless I inherently want to do that, these kinds of things. And so,
Mm-hmm.
for the Christian, this is a really important time. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of hopelessness,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the body of Christ is very confused. We don't, like we've got a lot of fraction, splintering. And so, one of the things that the biggest driver for that is men not processing their emotions, not dealing with the mental health struggles that they have, and not being, not walking in healthy masculine energy. And
Right.
so and that requires love. It requires sorrow. It requires pain. It requires analyzation of like my poor behavior. And it requires a lot of things. So,
Man. Well, and I also think on that a couple of things. There's two choices we have to make, right? I mean, you mentioned, 1 Corinthians 13, but all throughout the Bible, the word is, and that's where that's where I find myself often is like, well, okay, I'm reading this. I see what it says. I know what he's telling me, but am I going to make that choice? Am I going to follow through with what this says or with what Chad does? And so often it's right there in front of us on how to live, live of him, for him. And that's the difficult decision that we come across. And I think oftentimes I revert back to this. I've done it multiple times on this show, which I'm not, I'll do it again right now because, King David, and you go to the Psalms and man, you talk about a dude that poured his heart out to Christ, poured his heart out to
thank you.
God, and did it on the good and on the bad and everything in between like that's why, a man after God's own heart. Yes, that's the title he always kind of gets, but talk about being a beacon of hope for a lot of us, because he's a warrior. He was a warrior, completely fallible in just about every facet there is.
Right.
But man, the redemption he got from turning to God and just completely emptying himself to him through confession, through being open and honest about his sinful heart and nature. But man, there's just so many valuable lessons for us. And I think for our generation of men today, what you're talking about, and even your and I's dad's generation, the grandfather's generation of, that's been a slippery slope of just kind of being this, thinking that stoicism and being stoic is what it means to be a man. And it's not.
It's not. David's story, David's story and Joseph's story are really, really fascinating journeys of what healthy masculine energy is and isn't. So David is a young boy. I forgot the Greek, but he's like, there's one more kid out there, but he's like he's the other kid. And so then he comes in and he's getting anointed, and then he's going to this battle, and he shows up, and these dudes are quivering, and there's this, a huge guy out there, is there, cursing the gods and carrying on. And he's sitting up here, like the 16-year-old, the 13-year-old boy who's like,
right,
what's wrong with y'all? Like, why aren't you fighting? Right? He got all kinds of energy. And he's sitting up here seeing these people cower. He's like, hey, if you can imagine this today, like the story of like a young teenager being like, all right, I'll fight. Right. And so then we put all the stuff on him, right? So we put a Kevlar vest on him, and we got the gear, and he's got an M4, and he's got his 9mm and all his clips, and he's like, man, none of this stuff fits. Right. Like, I can't carry all this. He's like, I got this piece of cloth and some rocks, and I'm gonna go out here and fight this guy. And one of the most important, it's not talked about enough, is in the scripture. It says so he's ready. He's telling everybody he's going to go. And when he's out there, he runs. He actually runs towards Goliath. Now, think about your biggest fear. Right. It's like, I am not enough. I am not enough. I am not strong enough to manage this family. I'm not strong enough to keep this job. He runs towards his biggest obstacle. And then he gets, and then he obviously defeats him. And then he's got exile, right? So now he has suffering because Saul is mad at him, and Saul is like many of us, right? Like Saul's got an opportunity to be a mentor. Saul's got an opportunity to be a loving example of what it means to be a godly leader. Saul's not like that. Saul's jealous. He's got envy. He's got really insecurities. He's really neurotic, right? And so he chooses to chase this boy down, and David, who shows mercy on him in the cave, right? David is still saying like, hey, what's going on? So eventually he becomes king. Now he's got the thing with Bathsheba and this other woman, and then he's got his kids acting up, and one kid's killing another brother. You know what I mean? Like, and one kid's raping us. So he's got all of this turmoil, and then in Psalm he says, all I got is all I have is my brokenness to offer you. Right. I'm screwed up. All I have is a broken and contrite heart. Like, what can you do with that? Right. And so like, that is the story that many of us go through, right? Like, we have all of this ambition early in our 20s. We have all of this hope. And then ultimately we are
a lot of fear that we mitigate and just don't even look at as young individuals. Right.
And so then now you come face to face with the enemy, and you don't want to run towards him because that's you. Goliath is you. Right. And you don't want to run towards him because he's protected you. He's helped you make money. He's helped you get that car, get that house, get that woman. Yeah. But really, truly, that alter ego of yours is killing you. and it's keeping you from being the man that Christ needs you to be.
Yeah, golly. Yeah, that's man. I mean, that the Goliath is us, and until we slay him, man, we're going to be fighting that battle. That's so accurate. And I'll just phrase it like this. I remember my pastor, Dan Plord. He came and it was when I was at my low, and we were having breakfast. He's like, Chad, he's like, you're at the point where for 37 years you've been able to rely upon yourself. And you've had self-reliance. And now this is at such a scale that you only have him to rely upon. You only have Christ to rely upon. And that's is what you just said about David. Like, all I bring you, all I can offer you is my brokenness. And that's all he wants. Because then that's when he starts the work in us, right? I mean, that's been my experience. That's been my experience, is until I was willing to offer him all of me. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Thank you.
The good, the bad, the ugly. I could give him 75% of me. I could give him 99% of me. But it wasn't until I gave him all 100% did the work start taking place.
Thank you. Yeah. And really, this is part of, the growth cycle. There's great books, Fathered by God, Wild at Heart by Eldridge.
Yeah,
these are some great books. But all of us have to sort of come to ourselves. All of us have to come to ourselves. And my prayer, one of my prayers is I think about Joseph's story, right? So you got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and who Jacob becomes Israel, right? And so he has this come to Jesus with the angel. He messes up his hip. He's like, hey, I need this blessing. And then, so this is a decades long story of these three men, the patriarchs. And then this little boy who's supposed to be the savior of the kingdom gets sold into slavery. He gets put in jail. And so he's at this moment, right? He's got a moment to be brave. And it's really about graciousness. He's really showing grace to himself. Right, to the sons of Israel, right? His father's name is Israel, so he's showing to the sons of Israel, which are part of his community. He has been through it. He's dressing like an Egyptian. He's not even recognizable, right? But he's still following God. And he has this moment where his brothers come and they say, "Hey, we need help. Our land is, we're suffering in the land." And as the story goes, he leaves to catch himself, because he's so emotional. He's so overtaken with the emotion. And then he comes back. He says, hey, go get your dad and come back. And they're like, hey, we're just going to go get our dad. He's going to kill us. And then he tells them, this is the magic of masculinity, of the adult experience, right? What God is trying to teach us. He says, what you meant for bad, God meant for good. This suffering that I have experienced has led me to a place where I can be brave to show grace and love. That's really what this is, right? Like, this is about love, right? Yeah. Salvation of a family, the tribes of the 12 tribes, right? So that is a powerful moment, and it's much different than David or Moses, where there's these huge confrontations. This is about grace and forgiveness. And he's saying, hey, I know that I suffer at your hands. But I wouldn't be where I needed to be to love you, to save you, had you not put me in that situation. And now that's ultimate forgiveness right there.
Oh, I mean, what do you do? I guess because of your knowledge, which I love, man. How did you get that? Like, was that something that was instilled in you early on, studying the word and just being in it? Was that later in life? What's that look like for you? Just because I think others need to know. I'm interested because I love your just the way you can communicate it in a way that is able to be consumed effortlessly. And I think it's powerful in showing what he's done in you.
Yeah. So I went to Christian schools. I went to a Christian middle school. I went to Catholic high school. And when I got saved at the academy, I like got this book and I started reading it. And one of my favorite subjects is history and literature. I was a literature major at the academy. So, like really when you start to take in the story, and I think the Reading Scripture app, I think that's the one. They have like these amazing illustrations that do a really good job of explaining stories. Obviously, because I'm a storyteller, the stories really resonate with me in probably a way that's unique to me. But I think one of the most important things that we could do as men is not overcomplicate this thing. I think that like learn the story, and what does that mean to you, right?
Right.
Like what does it mean to demonstrate the courage like Moses when he stuttered? He's like, man, I'm not going, I'm not going back there. Like I can't talk, right? He's
like
I'm
my
not
brother
doing
can
that.
do it. My brother can do it.
Right? Like,
yeah.
he's like, I'm not about to do that. Like, so like, like there's all these stories where like, hey, like I need you to do X, Y, Z. And he's like, man, I'm not doing that. Jonah, right?
Right.
And so, but these are stories that resonate with us because we are men, and we are human beings. We're adults. And so when you start to really look at these stories and really listen to the story that your pastor's telling you, what you really should ask for when you're in your prayer is how does this resonate with me? How does this apply to me? Right? Like when you go into church, or you're, like at the beginning of the year, we always have the read the Bible all the way through challenge,
yeah.
right? Like pick a topic or pick a section of the book that you really want to like learn about. Like nobody's gonna get hot about Deuteronomy. Nobody wants to read Numbers and Deuteronomy, but like there are plenty of stories in the Bible that tell us a story of the human condition that has existed for thousands and thousands of years. There's not a lot of new stuff out here, right? So it really is a history book. And when you start to look at it that way, right? Like the Gospel of John is different than the other books. And one of the things you'll learn about in the Gospel of John is so there's like a typical Jewish sarcastic sort of tone. Like that's Jesus. He's like, man, I done told y'all multiple times about love and about salvation, and y'all don't want to listen. He's very curt and witty. So these stories, when you start to look at and do some background on the stories, why was Galatians written? Why was Ephesians written? Like start to dig into the Bible in a different kind of way. It really helps you to understand where you fit into this whole thing, because you've got to figure out purpose anyway. You're not going to figure that out without the Bible.
Well, and I also like what you said too, is of keeping it simple. I dive into like some deep commentary Bibles, like applications. John Corson's probably my favorite, but then sometimes it's like, okay, I'm going down so into the weeds on this. Like I need to come back up and just stay at the scripture. And I think that's what I loved about our pastor down in Florida and Calvary Church in Jupiter was, it was verse by verse, book by book, and it was really just a Bible teaching church scripturally. And I think nothing has to be added to that, right? I mean, that's his word. That's his living word at work still to this day and for eternity. It's the only thing that will continue forever is his word. And man, how that can pierce a man's heart and continue to sanctify him by just staying in that. I mean, and that's what, when I'm getting, when I'm looking left and right and not looking towards him, that's where I have to get back to, is that fundamental grounding of in the word. And I just, obviously you do that. I can, everybody listening can hear that in you. And I just think that's also a powerful, why we can work on ourselves, work on all those things that are necessary to become emotionally living to the way he has destined us to do. But I think it's also pivotal to know what you do to keep your sword sharp.
Yeah. And I think, so part of like our 40s, right, is really, and really like 30s is like, you still got a little bit of hope. You're not, you're all of that jadedness. And then you're like, wait, I'm an adult. This is
Yeah.
hard. I have the
Why does
budget.
40 feel like you're finally grown up? Like 40, I'm like, oh my, like I'm 43 now. I'm like, man, like I actually am a grown up now. Like,
Yeah. And your wife
yeah.
was probably like that 10 years ago or 15 years
Oh,
ago. Like,
100%. Yeah. Well, she was like 24 when we got married. She was already an adult, but not this guy. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, like one of the things that men need is adventure. And so one of the things that obsession with work can do is it can take the place of adventure.
Mm-hmm.
There's no greater adventure than committing your life um, to serving the Creator and living your purpose. There's no greater adventure because you know what? Like I'm gonna be like I got a road dog and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I got kids that I gotta bring up and I get to watch them grow. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like none of this is happiness. None of this is like there's a lot of people. You just need to be happy. You need to be happy. Like you're a parent. I'm a parent. Like I don't think I'm so happy to
Mm-hmm.
change a diaper. Or I'm so happy to to discipline my child. Or I'm so happy. You know what I mean? Like that's not the emotion I'm feeling.
Right.
However, it is the emotion I feel when I see that they've learned.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most important things to come into ourselves, especially in reading the word, is like you have to teach these lessons to your children.
Mm-hmm.
Like I almost feel like the body of Christ doesn't really like to tell testimony anymore, right? Like I, like Amazing Grace. I once was lost, but now I'm found. What does it
Mm-hmm.
mean to be lost? Like how
Mm-hmm.
bad was it? Now,
Right.
you don't have to tell all your business on social media. You don't have to tell everybody everything.
Right.
But you better tell your kids.
Yeah.
Right? Like I need to be able to confess some stuff to my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I got to tell my life group. Right? Like
Right.
I because this is part of the community. This is part of growth. And like these lessons I'm learning, the lessons I'm learning and reading the Bible, the lessons I'm learning as I go through life, these are lessons that need to be taught.
Right.
And they're not going to go anywhere just because you tithe 10% and you go to church every Sunday. Like that's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this really good book called Lies Men Believe. It's written by a Christian author, Walgamuth, I think is the last name. And one of the things he talks about is the spirit of passivity.
Mm.
Now think about this. He's not just talking to a guy who's not married and living in the basement of his parents' house. He's talking about the guy like you and I, who
Right.
has had a high level of success, but is truly passive in their spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
They're truly passive in the things that matter the most, like my family.
Mm-hmm.
And like you cannot, this. I can't raise children if I'm timid, right? I can't lead soldiers if I'm timid. Well, like I gotta have like that same kind of mentality. I can't lead my wife and my kids if I'm timid, if I'm passive, if I don't know what God is asking of me, if I'm not willing to be obedient to those things. Like disobedience is really in some ways, in many ways, it's an act of passivity. Like I don't know. It's a little bit like I got a plan and that's not really fitting in my plan.
Mm-hmm.
But like we have to be assertive in living as Christ is, like the fruits of the spirit are a good report card. If you were to give yourself an A, B, or C in gentleness,
Yeah,
and self-control, what would you, in love, Pete, like what would you give yourself, And so
right.
like there's ways for us to look at our life and get on this adventure of living an assertive life that's masculine, that isn't like old school, like I'm the king and you're all my servants.
Well, and you keep on circling back to the fruits of the spirit, which I love because I run through my head so often. I run through my head on that, and I just do like kind of an asmus check, like, okay, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, gentleness, self-control. And, think about that. Like it culturally, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Would that be considered like healthy masculinity in today's standard? Right?
Right.
Almost going back to the Joseph story. like the forgiveness and the grace that would that be considered masculine and by today's standard? No, but it's completely opposite of what truly is to be so confident in who we are in him that we actually are able to exhibit those fruits of the Spirit.
Right. And so like as a warrior of Christ, as a man of God, I have to be able to be strong, right? Like gentleness and patience and love and kindness don't matter if I'm not choosing those things. Right? Like you have to have a measure of the capacity, like you ever heard, like I have to have the ability to be dangerous so that I could choose kindness.
Right.
Like I have to be ability to be like an alpha so I can choose patience.
Yeah.
Right. So like these, like we don't talk about power because that means that I have to be vulnerable. And like in the secular world has got all this stuff that, they're talking about all of this stuff that's in the Bible. Like one of the things that's really amazing about my therapy is like all of that is in the Bible. About meditation.
And you go to like a non-Christian type, like just regular therapy. I know. And that's the same experience I had. Psychologist at the VA, unbelievably awesome. Everything completely coexisted or was in alignment with what the Word of God was doing at the same time. There was never one discrepancy, and it was all secular.
Thank you. And honestly, that resource is really important as we, come to the close. Like, like the one thing I really need to, we really need to tell men is like, you got to get in your purpose because you're not strong. You're not strong doing the stuff that you want to do. You're just disobedient.
Yeah.
You're really, you're not kind because you're making all this money to have 3 cars and a 3,000 square foot house. You're really just a little bit shallow, and you're really not like, I believe that Christians should be rich, wealthy, but like one of the prayers I have is like, give me as much money as I can so I could give it all away.
Yeah.
I could like be a blessing. But so I'm not asking, men to not take care of their families or provide, but what we should like, you got to get in therapy so you can talk about this stuff. Because you like whether you got issues with your father, your big brother, your sister, your pastor, somebody who abused you sexually, whatever, like you got to get that stuff out. And you're not praying it away, bro.
Right.
Right. Like I'm not praying away the guilt of the war.
Yeah.
Right. I have to deal with that and reconcile and forgive myself.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not going to do that if I can't sort of work that in a process. Right. Like, so like, again, he talks about the vine.
Hey, Joe, I can't hear you anymore. Are you still connected to me? I may have dropped you. I'm trying to see here. Joe, just stand by and let me try to reconnect you because you were on fire as you've been this whole show. But let me just see if I can't bring him back up. All right, folks. I tell you what, we were coming up on the end of this show, episode 33 of Christ Over Fear. I mean, that's Satan at work right there, because Joe Peppers was absolutely on fire for all of us. I mean, I know I can't wait to go back. I do go back and listen to the episodes just so I can hear just the story as I'm listening and actively listening during the interview and throwing out the questions, but then so I can really go back and absorb it. And I don't know that there's been an episode that has put out so much valuable insight into living godly for Christ as how Joe was able to communicate it today. So I thank him for being on today. It's been unbelievable. He's not coming back on. I'm looking at the stream and I don't see his thing popping up. So I know we had a Wi-Fi connectivity issue on that, but that's all right. So this was Joe Peppers today on episode 33 of Christ Over Fear. And we will have him up and operational. He's actually coming back on. So let me get him back on. Hey, I just said, dude, that was that was Satan at work, dude. You're so much on fire and dropping so many good nuggets. I just gave you probably the biggest plug I could give anybody on here, saying that you're giving so much godly wisdom that I have to go back and re-listen to it. So can you hear me at all? I think you're muted at this point. Try to hit your mic. I can't hear you. No, let me now try talking. No, it cut you off from a try one more. Up. All right. All right, folks. We will see you next month, July, for the next episode of Christ Over Fear. But until next time, continue to fight the good fight. Thanks. Bye.